Oh, those. That always sounds so much more impressive than. Well, thank you, Bonnie. As Reverend Bonnie said, this is the final week that we'll be reviewing the first 4 chapters. The first 3 were the thing itself, how it works, and what it does. And now we're going to go into how to use it. Reverend Bonnie alluded to the fact that a lot of you have read this chapter. How many of you have read the chapter, either now or at some time in your lives? Okay, so you all know how to use it, so we're done with that. Yeah, I wish there were a little bit more how-to in that chapter and how to use it, or in the book in general. When Reverend Bonnie was up here at the beginning of the month, at the beginning of the year, she said, she made this comment, how nice it would be if we had little computer chips that we could get from Ernest Holmes' brain, because he obviously made it work. And the implication is we probably don't make it work quite as consistently and quite as well as Ernest Holmes seems to have. And when she said that, I thought of my wish that NLP had existed back in Ernest Holmes' day, because NLP started out with experts like Virginia Satir, the pioneer of family therapy, Milton Erickson, the foremost hypnotherapist of his time. They had students that they were teaching, and at a certain point, it became clear that they weren't teaching quite as much as they could do, that there was something that always became something like intuition that they couldn't quite explain. And what the founders of NLP could do, Richard Bandler and John Grinder, was to take the things that they could observe from these people and sort of ferret out, sort of unpack what these intuitions were, how to do it. And so I wish that they were around to interview and to observe Ernest Holmes and to get more of that. When Doug was up here, excuse me, he quoted Tony Robbins as saying, if you can understand the state of mind and the beliefs of any person who's able to do something, you can do it too. Or as one of my NLP teachers put it even shorter, if it's possible in the world, it's possible for you. But the trick is to get to understand those states of mind and actually the sequence of states of mind and beliefs. Now, before Bandler and Grinder went to observe Milton Erickson, what Richard Bandler said was they did what they could do with the books that they had and the writings of Ernest Holmes before that. They could analyze the language, the linguistic part of neurolinguistic programming. And so what I propose to do is a little bit of that, apply some of that NLP looking at the words that Ernest Holmes has, because that's what we still have, is the books that he wrote. We can at least do that part of the analysis. So what I propose to do is to do that, but before that, there are some roadblocks that I have to acknowledge. One of them is that the books that Ernest Holmes wrote, Science of Mind, for instance, are not actually written in English. It looks like English, but it's not quite. It is what Holmes himself said. I should have brought my own lips today. What Holmes himself said of his teacher, Emma Curtis Hopkins, it is strange language, and you won't understand it. And indeed, that is often the case with some of the things that Holmes himself wrote. And what he said was, you have to get to the meaning in back of it. And the other roadblock, or at least speed bump, that I want to acknowledge is that we sometimes think we know what something means because we have older, excuse me, older ideas of what they mean from old thought rather than new thought. And there's a bit of baggage that we have to get rid of. As an example, Holmes will talk about how we should not judge by appearances, how some things are apparent And it brings to mind some of the more esoteric thoughts about the world of illusions and how the material world, some teachers will say, is a world of illusions. And I had thought that that's what that meant too, until I had this insight brought about by a couple of things. One of them was that a number of years ago, someone sent me an email with a number of optical illusions in it. You know, those things where you look at one circle and you see another circle of another color, or you might see the classic one of the two, the two lines that are really the same length, but they appear to be a different length. And the point of the email was how our senses deceive us and our minds tell us the truth, when actually the opposite is the case. Our eyes, our senses are showing us two lines that are the same length, for instance, but our minds, expecting something else, make them appear to be different lengths. And so that world of appearances is actually the ones we make up in our heads rather than the ones that our senses are giving us. Another example of that is what in NLP are called hallucinations. And hallucinations obviously are in your head. What the NLP teachers were showing us was that a lot of times we will think that we see something, and it's really our judgment of the thing that we're seeing rather than the thing itself. I'm sorry about the coughing, but at least I'm here. I should take a cough drop. An example of that I had was something I saw recently on the internet. Someone had written that they were in a public place and they saw someone else near them, and just from their appearance, the author could tell where this person was from and what their background was. And they even said that they knew, not just intuited, knew what this person's attitude was toward them and what this person was thinking about them and the emotions that they had toward them. And it did not occur to this writer at all that this was stuff that was going on in their head. They may have been correct in their judgment, but they may not have. They didn't bother to verify anything because they knew. And again, this is the world of appearances that they had. And in fact, when telling this story now, I was pretty careful to be as neutral as what in NLP is called artfully vague in telling it. I don't know how artful it was, but I was trying to be vague. Was the author of this piece man or a woman? Was the person that they were looking at? What was their gender? I didn't specify it, but you probably all made up something in your heads about that. When I said that they could tell where they were from and their background, was they assuming that they were from the Middle East or from the Midwest? I didn't have anything about that in my talk, in the story I just told, but chances are you made something up. Now that's fine when you're hearing a story. That's what you're supposed to do. But there's a difference between that and making up the story about what's going on in the world and assuming that that's what's actually happening. So when we look at, in Ernest Holmes' writings, when he talks about something being apparent, it's not the sensory world. This is not apparently a microphone. It's not apparently a podium, unless it's a lectern. Those are the facts. Those are the truth. That's what's going on. What we make up in our heads, and when we look at Ernest Holmes' writings, when we remember that, that's what he's talking about, what's apparent, to judge not by those appearances. So to go back to these, the notion of a strange language that he's writing in, there are points in Science of Mind, and I guess in other of his writings, where he'll talk about the difference between truth and facts, or between experience and reality. Now that's not English. If you look in the dictionary, all those words are in each other's definitions. They are combined together. They work together. So what is he saying when he's talking about the difference between a fact and the truth? Well, gleaning from the writing, what he's saying is a fact is what happens to be the case at the moment, while truth is what has to be the case about something. I think if we bear that distinction in mind, rather than a fact isn't real, yes, a fact is real. It is the case at the moment. And an example of that is like the walls are, it is a fact that the walls are whatever color that is. I don't know the name of that color. I'll call it taupe just for the hell of it. I know it's not. It is a fact that those walls are taupe. But they don't have to be. They were a different color before we painted them, and they'll be a different color sometime in the future, probably. That's just the momentary fact of things. But in order for it to be a wall, the truth of it is that it has to be vertical. You know, if it's not vertical, it's not a wall. That's the truth of a wall. The fact of this particular wall at this particular time is this particular color. That's the condition. That can change. But it can change from being vertical and still be a wall. So I think as we go through Ernest Holmes' writings, we understand that to be the difference. A condition is something that can change because it's just the fact of the moment. It's still true. It's still there. It's not an illusion. We're not making up the fact that the wall is that color. And so as we go through his writings, to understand that as the difference is, I think, very, very helpful, because otherwise we get lost in this strange language and we get lost in our old assumptions about what words mean. When Reverend Bonnie was up here at the beginning of the year, she talked about, she read something from Ernest Holmes explaining how we change our beliefs and change our conditions. And so when we go into our minds, we meet this belief in the necessity of a particular difficulty that we want to change. And we repudiate that belief. We don't repudiate the belief that that difficulty is currently a condition, is currently existing, is currently true. We repudiate the belief in its necessity, in it having to be true. It happens to be true. It doesn't have to be true. So with all that as prologue, let's start looking at some of the things that Ernest Holmes says in this chapter and put it under the magnifying glass and see what the implications of the actual language are. He talks of the law that is part of this, or a way of approaching the thing itself, the law that is the actual doing of the things, the how it works thing. And he says, it is right where we happen to be at any given time. It occupies all space and fills every form. Now, the implication of something occupying space is that it has a physical, material reality. And so when we look at this idea of a law, we start to think of it not as some abstract concept, but as some physical, material thing that's going on. He says, the law also flows through us because it flows through everything. So here we begin to understand how Holmes perceives and represents the law to itself, not as something that just is here, but as something that has a movement to it. It flows. It flows through us. Now, whether he feels that flow, whether he sees that flow, whether it's a combination, he doesn't say, and so we have to kind of piece that together, work it out, try one thing, try another, experiment with this science. So how does flow feel to him, or how does it look to him? How would it feel to us when we're working with it? Do we feel that flow, or is it more of an abstract concept? Then we have to get back to the feeling of the flow. He says, it works for us by flowing through us. Just to emphasize that again, instead of the more usual formulation, it only can do for us what it does through us. Here he's saying it works for us by flowing through us. And he says it's willing to take form through the impulse of our creative belief. Now, belief is very, very important in Ernest Holmes' teaching. And we have to look at how that works with some of the other teaching. For instance, when Tina was up here, she said that the law works the same for everyone. It is no respecter of persons. And also it is done unto us as we believe. That seems to be, there's a tension there that we have to resolve in some way. What she said was, if no matter who you are, if you combine blue paint and yellow paint, you're going to get green paint. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what you believe. Right? If you have blue paint and yellow paint and you want to have purple paint, you want to paint something purple, you give something to Reverend Bonnie as a gift. What are you going to do? Are you going to say, well, I'm going to make myself believe that blue paint and yellow paint will make purple paint? I will write affirmations about how blue paint and yellow paint make purple paint. I will visualize combining the two and making purple. And you can do that all day long. You're not going to end up with purple paint. That's a misapplication of the teaching. And it's one, in this example, we obviously won't fall into, but it's a misapplication that it is easy in a more abstract case to have. As Ernest Holmes says, the law obeys us as we first obey it. So how would we then use the law to get purple paint? We would use the law to get purple paint to find some way to trade the yellow for red. And then we can combine the blue and the red and make purple and be happy about it. So as we go through Ernest Holmes' writings, as we go through his teachings, we have to remember that it's done unto you as you make believe. It's done unto you as you believe in accordance with the law as we obey the law. It's not that, there's a lot to it, as with any science. So I'm going to start going through a little example that he actually has is how he works with it, and look at the wording and understand that there's a sequence to it, and working with it in an NLP sort of way. I'm not going to go through all of it because it would be too long, but I'm going to start. He says, let us analyze this. One finds himself impoverished. That is, he's looking at things externally. He's using his senses to see, oh, I'm poor. I don't have stuff. I don't have a way to get stuff. These are an external truth, an external fact, condition that is real that he sees. So then he wishes to change the condition. So perceiving this external condition gives rise to an internal feeling of wanting something different. This is a sequence that we're going to go through. He knows that it is not in the... Now, there's two things that he says about knows, and I'm going to say that he's sort of saying the same thing in different words. He knows that it is not in accord with ultimate reality, and therefore he knows that the apparent limited condition has no real law to support it. Now, so what we've done so far, we've seen something in the outside world, we have an emotional reaction that we wanted to change, and now this knowing is something that Ernest Holmes isn't telling us the details of. So we have to look in other parts of his writing, perhaps, to see how one comes to know these things. But what it is, what the content of the knowing is that the thing that we're seeing, the condition, doesn't have anything, as he says, to support it, to hold it in place. It can be moved, it can be changed, and here we come back to this idea of flow. It is this flow of the law that moves the condition into a different state. So he wishes, so he's gone back to knowing and then going back to this emotional state of wishing something in the opposite direction. He talks about here realizing, and again, realizing is in NLP what's called what is it called? It's called a word that is not specified, as opposed to seeing something, hearing something, feeling something. Those are all words that specify things. Realizing, knowing, understanding, those are all words that Ernest Holmes unfortunately uses enough so that we don't get at how he's doing it until we look maybe at other passages. But in this one, he realizes that the law is a law of freedom, and he now states, so this is another part of the process, to say something out loud. He states that this law is flowing through him. So this statement gives rise to a feeling of flowing. Holmes then says, but the image of his limitation persists. So what's going on in this little piece here? You say something out loud. It gives rise to a feeling of flowing, and then this mental image comes up. So now you have to do something about that. So you see, he's not just saying some vague notions about what to do. If we actually analyze the words, he's giving us a sequence of operations that we have to go through. Now there's more to it, and I'm not going to go through it all, but I'm going to suggest that what we can do is use this tool of actually looking at the words, looking at the language in detail under the magnifying glass, and working out how exactly Ernest Holmes did what he did, because we can't get those chips from his brain and put them in ours. This is something that we can do. Now, this might be a lot of work. I'm not saying it's not, but it's how you get it to work. By either intuiting the way that Holmes himself did, or by pulling out, by unpacking what it is he's saying in detail. So that's a tool that we all can use to get to understand how to use it. Another tool that we have available to us is something that every speaker here has alluded to, and that is classes. You go to these classes and maybe use the tool of looking at the language in detail and asking questions. What does this mean? What does that mean? Asking each other, asking the teacher of the class. Yes, you're welcome, Bonnie. Yes, you're welcome, Barbara. Yes, ask these questions of them. And that's how we get to apply the science of mind. And so it is.